Thank you for that panel, Tracy. It was really good. It's my pleasure really to introduce Tom Osha, who is the Senior VP of Innovation and Economic Development for Wexford Science and Technology. Wexford Science and Technology has played a remarkable role in our nation's innovation ecosystem. And it is an exciting opportunity to welcome them here to Rhode Island shortly. Tom leads the implementation of Wexford's Knowledge Community program, how they do it, how they work with cities and academic institutions across the United States. I don't know how long you've been with Wexford, but it's been, how long? 9 years. 9 years, okay. He's done much in his career. He's been sought out speaker. He has been a member of the Leadership Council of the Brookings Institute. He's played a key role in our NATO organization and special assistant to Senator Richard Lugar. So he's sort of been in innovation in the political world, in the national world, and it's great to welcome him here to paint his future for us.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and thanks for sticking around and leaving me water. So what I'm going to try and do is wrap a bow on what you've heard today. And really the watchword has been collaboration. That doesn't work either. And so it's interesting that we find ourselves here today on the anniversary of the SALT trials, right? So the SALT trials were really, some would say, maybe one of the first massive interdisciplinary collaborations kind of around the world. Thank you so much. And so, you have 1.8 million school children in the US, Canada, Finland came together, massive trial to try and wipe out this horrible disease. And the reason I thought it was kind of interesting that today happened to be that anniversary was the fact that if you look at what the new normal for life sciences is becoming, well, many of those collaborative kind of elements are at play today in the same way they were then. You've got declining federal support, and so it's going to have to be made up somewhere. So people are looking for new partners, universities, the corporate sector, and others. You have this kind of transition from short-term treatment to kind of long-term management. In fact, we heard maybe the possibility someday of cancer being treated like a chronic disease, right, rather than what it is. Obviously, talk to anybody in a hospital and you're going to hear about this value-based care and really kind of validated by replicable evidence. Consumers and the government now are really talking about pressure on pricing. We've seen some things in the newspaper, maybe some out of control kind of stuff, but in our first panel, we heard that there really is a serious and very complicated pathway to bringing drugs to market. It's one that has serious and real costs associated with it. So there's an education element to this as well. And certainly there's kind of this, what I'll call this market reality that's kind of driving the need for more translational and open source business models. And then at the end of the day, you also have what I'll call non-industry players entering healthcare themselves, right? So Google has Google Health, Boeing does the patent challenge, and this year, one of the patent challenge winners for Boeing was actually an imaging technology used to check the seams on aircraft skins being used now to look into the human body. And so now Boeing is launching an entire healthcare line based on that. So you take these kinds of new normal and you put them against kind of what I call the compounding factors, right? So, and these are the things that anyone in innovation is looking for. And number one is talent, right? Talent is the real currency of innovation. Nothing substitutes for it, and everything follows it. And so when I do about 40 of these speeches a year, I see about 100 different cities. And whenever somebody says we have a problem with capital, we don't have enough of it, well, you have enough of it, but I know what they really have is a problem with talent, right? Because money tends to find its way to talent. And so you need to build ecosystems that kind of retain talent. And the second, and you all already know this, is that innovation really has become entirely a social enterprise. Now that changes the nature of our work, and it changes where we do that work. Right? Capital efficiency demands this kind of resource concentration. In fact, we just heard about this new incubator opening up, right? It's going to concentrate resources and people together. An incredible and a very important step forward for Providence. You have the primacy of what I call density within proximity, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then I firmly believe, as Wexford does, that innovation must also create social and economic innovation, right? And so as I think about that environment, and then we start seeing that there is more open source that's starting to come today. So Johnson & Johnson has announced that they're bringing this software element to One Ship Street. I'll talk about that in a second. This is actually J&J's facility in Houston, Texas, the Texas Medical Center. And so it's meant to be kind of this open space, which is very nice. But it's not just about space. In fact, addressing the innovation challenges really requires more than just great space, but it requires this collaborative environment. And so I'd like to take you through the collaborative environment in a minute, how we look at it, how we've seen it in some other places, and what we think it can look like here. So we call this a knowledge community. And we base it kind of on 4 elements. So for us, a knowledge community is really this highly active, mixed-use, integrated, programming-dependent environment built on a foundation of research, discovery, and entrepreneurial activity, right? And so the 4 elements, one of those is universities, right? And so that is the value proposition. At the end of the day, real estate is not about economics. It's about creativity and productivity. If you think I'm wrong, go to Kendall Square and ask what they pay per square foot for rent, right? Or go to Manhattan, or go to San Francisco. They pay that because those environments are more creative and productive. There is a lot cheaper real estate to happen in other places, but they need that kind of environment to do what they need to do. And in this kind of environment right here, one of the things that people will look at to drive that value proposition is the access, the proximity, the infrastructure, the relationships that they can create with your outstanding institutions of higher education, with Brown and with URI and with RISD and Johnson & Wales and Providence, and I put Lifespan in there too as having a solid research program themselves. And so their presence in this environment is a primary driver. Economic development folks look at 2 things. They look at capital spending and they look at the number of jobs created. Now those are important, but universities and research environments look at other things. The growth of the research enterprise. We've heard a lot today about commercialization and moving discoveries into the hands of man. That's highly important. Recruiting better faculty or faculty with more entrepreneurial spirit. Unlocking students, there's a student section out there, unlocking that entrepreneurial spirit. So that environment requires a focus on different things. The second is the built environment. I'll talk about the built environment in a second. You need the right kind of place to do innovation. In fact, one of the mistakes that a lot of folks make is what they do is they put, cities and others, they put an awful lot of money into incubators and into subsidized office space for startups. But then what happens is if you haven't thought about the ecosystem, those that are successful find themselves having to leave. And so all of a sudden, they're leaving, they're going away. About the time they're getting their first solid raise of money, which when they're most susceptible to that draw to one of the coasts, as we call it, or to Austin, or the research triangle, depends upon what you're doing. But so thinking through what we call this kind of matriculation path, and thinking through an environment that allows you to have startups in the presence of large corporate innovation centers, and have growth companies and university research all together kind of in a mixed environment. The third element is where the CIC comes in, and that's what we call kind of infrastructure for innovation. So you really need these kinds of intermediaries to create density, right? To kind of create that social environment, right? So if innovation is really a social enterprise, then having the right kind of environment for it's very important. CIC billed themselves as the largest concentration of startups anywhere in the world. And if you've been there to 1 Main in Kendall Square, or 50 Milk in Boston, or where they are here in St. Louis, or we have them in Miami and are bringing them to Philadelphia, these are highly dense environments. They are excellent at packing people in to tight spaces. And that's important because those kinds of collisions, both intentional and serendipitous, are where new ideas spring forth. So if you've seen Tim Rose speak, he likes to tell the story that Android actually sprang out of the CIC in Cambridge, right? And a couple of guys there bumped into each other, and the next thing you know, this idea comes forward, and then they bump into Google, who later takes it and makes it a real platform play. So this kind of environment, whether it comes in the form of shared labs like a Lab Central, things like a CIC, maker spaces, all of that works together. But it does not work to the exclusion of the other things in the market, right? So this new buy-side lab incubator is perfect. Other things happening around the city are perfect. All of that feeds into, right, the larger ecosystem. And so this kind of innovation elements is like making wine. It really depends upon what the needs of the market is as to what elements that you bring to it. What programming is a very, very important one. And so we'll be bringing the Venture Cafe, which if you've been to a Venture Cafe in Cambridge or Boston, are highly activated environments that bring together researchers, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, corporate innovators, designers, artists, others together in this kind of interesting spatial geography. And then this last one, this community engagement piece, goes beyond just the talent that you have sitting in the four-year institutions. In fact, if you're going to really build a serious life science ecosystem here, you need a workforce you don't have today, right? 40% of the jobs in this environment will not require a four-year degree. So you're going to really need to work with the Providence Community College and with the high school system to get this layer of jobs, because as you start scaling your companies beyond 10 to 12 people, you need to start adding in then a layer of technician class, coder class, depending on what you're doing, that many times come with an associate's degree or come out of a STEM high school. And so the tight integration of that workforce development is a key component. We do it in Baltimore by actually putting the Life Science Institute of the Baltimore City Community College right in one of our buildings and guaranteeing every one of those students an internship with the companies in the UM Biopark. Now, what makes it particularly interesting is the average age of these students is 29. Where do they come from? The roughest neighborhoods in East and West Baltimore. How do we get them? We actually create programming that gets the kids at the elementary school level, carries them through middle school, Vivian C. Thomas High School, BCCC, and you have the opportunity then, if you graduate BCCC, to either take a job or to go get your four-year degree in laboratory sciences. Now, everything I just described is within a 10-minute walk. So some of the traditional barriers to educational attainment in disenfranchised neighborhoods bleed away. And we're looking at those kinds of approaches here as well, so that indeed the prosperity that comes from the investment in one of these knowledge communities, those benefits flow in a multiplicity of directions. And it really is kind of much more than just real estate. Probably figured out, while I work for a real estate developer that does this very well, I don't do real estate. So you're going to see other guys here to do the development and to do the real estate. What I figure out is I figure out how these environments work, right? And all the things in italics have nothing to do with real estate. So as these environments get more complex, they rely less on the real estate and more on the curation, the activation, the integration that happens. Now, that said, let's talk about Providence's advantages, right? So I had this conversation with a colleague between the first and second panel who happened to give me a ring there because I gave a speech that talked about what we're starting to see, I think, finally, is a cost of doing business trajectory that is about to reach its limits in gateway markets. So, and I'm seeing an emergence now of what I'm calling these complementary cities, right? Whether it's Eindhoven in the Netherlands, Fresno, Lyon, Manchester, Providence, Richmond, environments that have a quality of life, the presence of great academic institutions, favorable business climate and environment, cool spaces that people want to go to, affordable housing, good transportation. All of that working together now is starting to cause people to make a different choice, right? It's not necessarily that economic choice. It is more affordable, but still the creative and the productive value has to be there. And we see this emerging in Providence. So, as Patrice said, I am on the board of Brookings on Bruce Katz's board. And so Bruce and I spent a lot of time talking at board meetings and what markets we like. And so it was about 3 years ago that Bruce said, I'm really getting high on Providence, right? They've got this governor who wants to get things done. Stefan Pryor at Commerce is really out there to try and really recreate this economy. And I think you should go take a look at it. And so Jim Behrens and I did. Some of you may have met Jim. He is our president and CEO and kind of our inspiration. And we came here and we looked, we met with Brown, we met with others, and we walked away thinking, there's something special happening here. And the reason we thought there was something special happening here was we kind of had experience in doing this in St. Louis. So St. Louis is not a major market. And in St. Louis, what we've done is we've created what's called Cortex. Right, it's kind of the center of innovation. It has multiple parts to it. The main part is what we call the 4240 building. Now I'll describe the 4240 building to you. In that building is Washington University Innovations. That's tech transfer, that is community engagements, a Scandalaris Center for Entrepreneurial Education. Boeing has Phantom Works in its venture fund there. Uber, MasterCard, Square, Monsanto, Emerson Electric, Ralston Purina, and if you bake, Fleischmann's. You know what laboratory looks like for a yeast company? Test kitchens, right? So imagine the goodies that seem to be flowing around and find their way up to the CIC's kitchen, because the second floor is the Cambridge Innovation Center and one of the leading digital marketing firms in the Midwest. It's this highly activated environment that we created on purpose for people to mix back and forth. And so that success begat the success of creating the Cortex Commons, a park that you program with all the things you program in a park, from food trucks to yoga to outdoor concerts at night. That is an amenity for the neighborhoods, both the wealthy neighborhood of the Central West End and the emerging neighborhood of Tower Grove, as well as bringing everybody out of their buildings. Because it's one thing to have great science, but great scientists spend a lot of time heads down doing science. And so sometimes they need a little bit of inducement to come out of the labs to begin to mix with artists and tech and others. And the last panel talked really about this crossover between life sciences and technology. One place where you look at what Providence does well, and it's one of the things that you have going for it. And this is the next building that we have under development now. We're going to double the CIC space. We're going to bring in some lab components. And Microsoft has just announced they're bringing their Midwest Center of development there. So there's a lot to like about Providence as well. Viewed against St. Louis, there's a lot we like. Not the least of which you're in the middle of kind of this 33 million person megapolis, as Brookings calls it. You have great collaboration, which was absolutely evident throughout the day today, right? You've got good life sciences research strengths, a whole panel on the importance of neuro. What you have going on in devices, given your history and instrumentation, is very, very strong. Again, the city and the state government. And you also have this you have great resources. And many of them I saw in the other room there. The Greenhouse and Founders League and Bioscience RI. And then you have what's happening here today, right? MedMates coming together and creating this life science expo to bring all of us together. These are catalytic events, and I've seen them, whether it's in Indianapolis, whether it's in Winston-Salem, whether it's in Tappan, Florida, things like this. This is the first one. It'll grow from here, but I got to tell you, for a first one, you're doing really, really well. These are catalytic events that get people to start coming together. And it is this fostering this sense of collaboration that I've experienced throughout the day that continues to give us confidence that important things are happening here. So, if we're going to give important things a sense of place, what's that sense of place going to look like? Well, first of all, we want to really create, it isn't just a building, right? Remember, it's really about doing several things. It's about rejuvenating the jewelry district. It's about connecting the city back together, a city that was bifurcated by 195 for many years. Stimulating economic growth across multiple dimensions, building on the strengths that we've already talked about, and really kind of leveraging everything from South Street Landing to One Ship Street to this innovation center that's going to be on what are referred to as parcels 22 and 25. It's about all of them working in concert with one another, right? So it started at South Street Landing. It's kind of a project that we took over when we stepped in with CB Properties. And now you have the Nursing Education Center, which is really a premier element of that, between URI and Brown. And that's going to be an incredible driver of new talent. Right, and so that's going to be coming online very, very soon. You have One Ship, right, which was talked about a little bit. It is an opportunistic thing. No, it's not a terribly wonderful building, but you know what? You needed Johnson & Johnson. They were here looking and they needed somewhere to be. And so there's the advantage of being able to be opportunistic and grab somebody, but there's another advantage. I'm going to show you, Stefan showed you pictures this morning of the beautiful building. It's going to take 2 years to build that. So what are you going to do for 2 years? You're going to put something in the market that allows you to start this innovation district out. This, along with the incubator we heard about, along with the other centers of gravity that are happening. And now the innovation district starts taking place now rather than later. Now, at some point, J&J is going to move, and they're going to move into the new building, I would hope. So what's this become? Well, gives you multiple price points in your market. Right? And so this could be repurposed as something else. Eventually, perhaps, maybe, it gets raised all together and something else gets put in its place. But it's not bad to have multiple entry points into a market, particularly in a complementary city. And then finally, there's the Innovation Center. Some pictures of what you've seen. Give you a brief update. We are completed with master planning and schematic design. Now, it took just a little bit longer than we wanted for the schematic design. So what we did was we stepped back, and in talking about how important programming is to us, what we wanted to do, if any of you have seen District Hall in Boston, which I think is at 75 Northern Avenue, is their address there in the Seaport, District Hall is it's where the Venture Cafe really programs and comes alive in a standalone environment. And so what we wanted to do was step back a bit and create an environment where we could bring kind of a standalone district hall into this environment, plus creating an outdoor space for events and gathering. Now, why is this important in somebody who develops buildings? Well, as I look across what you have going on in Providence, you have several centers of gravity already. Around your universities, around your companies, you've got a great startup scene, you got things that are going on, but you have no center of congregation. Right? No North Star where it all comes together. And so we wanted to be able to provide this kind of center of congregation for programming, for events, for activation that can be used by multiple types of organizations, right? Whether it's somebody like MedMates, who sounds like it's going to be one of the first tenants of CIC. What an incredible place. Maybe at some point we'll have one of these in there. But it provides really more of kind of a soul, if you will, for the environment. All great environments kind of have this iconic spiritual center, and that really is what we want to do, at least start creating. And so it's going to sit amongst the buildings. This is there's the Aloft Hotel that Stefan talked about, and on the left is the back side of the building. This is what the building looks like from its front. We are blessed to have Brown as an anchor tenant, the School of Professional Studies, which will be a great contributor and again a real driver of intellectual capital. You can see the CIC's brand mark there. That'll be kind of a two-story CIC, and as it wraps around, it wraps into kind of a district hall that faces this plaza and this outdoor area as well. Plenty of space for innovation companies to be a part of this. And again, as you see, putting those uses down to the ground floor, the food and the social, the meeting spaces, right, to make this an accessible environment to all. Kind of an overview of how you might be able to program that public space, whether it's the food truck rodeos, whether it's concert venues, whether it's just places to hang out. And it is that hanging out so important. So go to any great environment, and you probably think of your favorite ones, and all of them have this kind of place where these accidental collisions are really made. I'll also tell you that the importance of this kind of density of people, you can't have great retail without enough market rate housing and enough kinds of congregation spaces to support it. If you don't, you get what I call 7-hour retail. You get Subway and shops like that, which nothing wrong with them, there's definitely a place for them, but what you want is 17-hour retail. And authentic, right? That leverages the great food scene you've got going on in Federal Hill and in other places around here. And there we are. So with that, I might have gone a couple of minutes over. I hope you forgive me. Happy to take a question or two if there's time. I'm also happy to just see anybody afterwards if you prefer.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I think I definitely, someone new to the bioscience field, I'm learning a lot, and it's very exciting to see the potential as you speak to it. One of the questions I think we all have here in Rhode Island, especially someone coming from Boston, is the question of, well, what makes a company choose to be here and stay here? As you can look right over and see Boston and its opportunity, and understanding us as a complementary city, I think one of the things that's tough is that 45 minutes away is that bigger market. So and I think those components you mentioned, having cool spaces, having the regulatory, the tax breaks and all that is essential. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's gonna come down to the capital, you know, to some extent, you know, if you have a bigger market. But am I wrong about that? And yeah, so I'd like to know, when it comes down to that, what can we do?
So a couple of things you can do. The first is don't try to be boss, right? So don't compete on small molecule. Don't compete on that kind of thing. They've got that locked. But you know what? Compete on neuroscience, right? Of which you are a premier place. Compete medical devices because your legacy of instrumentation gives you an advantage. So compete on your comparative advantages first. So that's kind of one thing, and based on the companies that I've seen up here, every company that I've seen today, and I've been at all the panels, all seems to have a comparative advantage as to why being located here is good for them. So that's kind of one point. The second point is, I think there is I'd have to do the math, but you're a perfect example, right? Is here you got tired of making that commute. And so now I want to really create a company near me. And so I think there's probably more of that back and forth than you would expect. It's actually an economic development strategy that Phoenix is taking. So take away Phoenix trying to be just a place where you have call centers. Phoenix's new economic development strategy, and kind of the secret California doesn't want you to know, is most of its execs decamp San Francisco on Friday afternoon, and they fly to Phoenix and they live there. And so now what you're starting to see is a few of them decide, oh, I'm just tired of flying back and forth. I'll leave my corporate headquarters there just in name only, but I'm going to start bringing more and more important things there. And so that's a longer term strategy, but I think it actually is a play that you could do. You are right. I do not mean to diminish the fact that capital is important. But flip that around. You're only 45 minutes from $8 billion of concentrated VC investment right there, even just in one Broadway. And so I believe, because I believe in Governor Raimondo and Stefan, and I believe in the folks in this room, I believe you've got a unique kind of situation. So I'll tell you, your College Station in Bryan, in Texas, suffers because it is too close to Austin and it's too close to Houston, and it has nothing going for it. Besides, it has Texas A&M. But besides that, it doesn't have much going for it, right? It is easy to go to those other places. Here, yeah, you can go to Boston, you want to drive a little bit farther, you can go to New York, but there's enough happening here that I think you can get a little bit of that reverse pull effect, particularly as some of the dynamics of Cambridge and Boston are starting to get concerning to those doing startups, right? They're very concerned that affordability of housing is making it impossible to recruit for anything below the highest compensated job, or the commute is getting so far that it's diminishing productivity of the company. So that's kind of one. That's one. The tax structure in some places is getting a bit onerous, and so to maybe decamp for somebody with a friendlier business policy is a good idea. Tends not to be a sustainable one, right? Because governors come and go. So the other elements are more important, but layering that on there is certainly a nice to have. And this is an incredible environment with great institutions doing some important stuff. So that's kind of the way I look at it. In fact, probably what I'd be doing is next year, I'd have a VC track as part of your life sciences thing. I'd be inviting them to come here and see what you're doing. And I think they'll be surprised. And they'll say, well, 45 minutes away? Yeah, I can go there. God, I'm getting on a plane and flying 3 hours now to check on companies. So I hope that answers it a little bit. Yeah.
The considerable portion of the organic growth that's occurred here in the last 10 or 20 years has been from the nonprofit sector. And as your project begins to take shape, your anchor tenants are emerging from that sector. What do you envision for the sort of mix between growth of the nonprofit sector and growth of the commercial for-profit sector in this market? And how does that correlate with some of the more mature markets like Boston, Cambridge? And how does it correlate with those charts that you showed at the beginning that showed the flatlining of federal funding of basic research?
Sure. So that's a great question. So the chart I showed was actually the NIH funding chart that basically shows NIH funding is unchanged since 2003, right? You had this kind of artificial thing in 2008 because of the stimulus, but if you look at it on a dollar for dollar basis, it's roughly about the same as it was in 2003. So where we're seeing, and I can only speak to our portfolio, but it's 13 of these projects around the country. What we're starting to see is those universities wanting to get closer to the for-profit sector. Because what they're trying to do is they want to open up multidimensional relationships to start replacing some of that funding. So I'll use an example. Yesterday I was with Mitch Daniels, who's the president of Purdue University. And Purdue, solid research institution, it's well known as an engineering school, not so much in life sciences, but fully 25% of Purdue's research enterprise comes from direct corporate engagement. And so what they're doing is looking to bring even more and more of that. The reason they want it is it both replaces some of the reduced federal spending, but more importantly, it provides experiential learning opportunities for their students. By companies being able to come closer, what they can do is establish a brand position for recruiting the best students. And we think that actually is something that is possible here in Providence. You've got great universities, you have strong companies in Boston and New York who wouldn't mind having a presence here, both to be able to pursue research lines that you're good at, right, neuro or devices or a couple of the others that you've outlined today, but also for the presence in front of your very best students for recruiting. So in St. Louis, Boeing is there with Boeing Ventures. Boeing Ventures used to sit on the Boeing campus, 2,000-acre campus in St. Louis. It wasn't recruited from somewhere else. Boeing has a 2,000-acre campus and they call it the Big Blue Box. Now, when they're recruiting the very best students who are going to be coming out of Purdue or Washington University or Brown or somewhere, those students don't want to sit in a 2-story, cubicle-laden environment where they have to get in a car and drive 15 minutes just to get anything decent to eat. They want to be in this cool, activated environment with great food choices, lots of interesting entrepreneurs, even though they may be working for a larger company, being in that environment is important. So for Boeing, they looked at that as much as a brand exercise as they did the opportunity to invest in any of those companies up in the CIC. And once Boeing did it, Emerson did it, Ralston Purina did it, Monsanto did it, all again, St. Louis kinds of companies. And then some of the others like Uber and Square started to come in. So we kind of see this coming together of your not-for-profit and your for-profit side. We're starting to see it as well in the hospital systems. So look at what Florida Hospital's doing down in Orlando and in Tampa by wanting to come together, or what the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic are doing in their own environments to create these innovation districts to bring companies closer together. So we actually see them going in lockstep as they grow. But it requires talent delivered into the ecosystem. Without talent, they're both going to bleed off, right?
Well,
That's it?
thank you.
Great, thank you.
I have a couple of quick comments to wrap things up, as well as Carol. And we do have some questionnaires that will really help us. I'm really excited, Tom, to have Wexford here. It's an exciting addition to our community, a catalyst for growth here. We've got something going here, but Wexford coming in here is like a whole new set of army. It's very exciting for us.
Thank you for the welcome that we've been given every time.
And this presentation is really just, we're thrilled. And we're very excited to be Wexford's first tenant. Subject to negotiation. I love the idea of the collision of talent and ambition to spawn innovation and wealth. That's how I term it. It's the word collision. And the events that we've tried to have since we gave birth to MedMates is about that collision. So I'm right with you on that. Just in thinking about the day, the exhibitors, I've chatted with a number of them, really glad to be here, great connections, looking forward to coming next year, looking forward to being involved between now and next year. Stefan Pryor, he's a strong advocate for MedMates, for the life science community. He's a key supporter, as is the rest of his team at Commerce. Bio, we're excited to have Bio on board here to bring the resources that they have available with their international network and discounts on supplies. Neuroscience, excited to hear that it's easier for them to form collaborations in our state amongst the universities and the clinicians, and that they're finding companies in here to collaborate with to build products. And a lot of those companies I know connected with each other at MedMates events, so I was delighted to hear that and to get it on film. Precision medicine, I haven't fully understood genomics. I kind of akin it to the difference between seeing something with the naked eye versus a powerful microscope, being able to really get down to the micro level to distinguish between the opportunities for intervention that otherwise would not be possible. And the device innovation here between human factors and material sciences and health IT, very exciting. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Carol to wrap things up.
Thank you, Dave.
And again, thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you. So it's hard to believe that that this time has come. It's time to close the day. I want to thank you, Tom, for your excellent presentation and your support, and thank you to everyone here who came today. And it's my job, really, to as the only employee of MedMates, it can't all be done by one person, and it will take a village. And I want to thank all the volunteers that helped us over the last 3 months get ready for this day today. And so I'd like to acknowledge all the volunteers right now. If you could stand, we actually have a gift for you. So if you're in the room, please come up and we will give you a gift to thank you. Just a last closing thought. It's really going to take all of us together to make this happen. And as we work together, we can really build a thriving Rhode Island life science economy. And it will take all of our resources, our collaborative efforts, and our confidence to really grow this economy in Rhode Island and to make MedMates a very key player in making this happen. So I want to thank David Goldsmith, our president of our board, all our board members, all our volunteers, and all of you for making this such a wonderful inaugural event. And now it's time to celebrate. It's time to move on to our reception and to enjoy the rest of the evening with networking. And thank you again all for coming today.